Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some PathOfExile discussion. Today, I wanted to take you through a strategy that I've come up with fairly late in patch 3.25 that is different to a lot of other things people are doing to magic find and to gather loot late in the league, but that I think is working pretty well for me, and it is also something that's not particularly difficult to replicate yourself. In the background, I'm going to play some footage of a run of this strategy. This is not the best run that I've got. This is one that I found that was a good example of what this looks like when it goes a little bit wrong. I picked a map that has a very sketchy map mod on it that gets me killed 3 times in this run, and that is the crit mod. The reason that we've got this though is because you pretty much can't get a single perfect mod on a tier 17 with none of the awful mods. So we're going to be running it alongside a mod we don't really want to run that we would normally roll over, the crit mod. The character that you're going to see in this video, and I'm going to play some footage in the background of them running through a tier 17 map doing this, is quite cheap with the exception of this axe, and this axe is still in the 25 divine range. And so we have a 25 divine axe that we're using here. If you can't afford that, just use Jack the Axe until you can afford a recombinated axe. Then we have the surrender. I well rolled the surrender, and the important roll is the recover X life on block. That's going to cost you something of the order of 5 divines. You can get a bad roll one for a lot cheaper, but it is worth paying the extra to get that upgrade at some point. Then we've got a very well rolled Resath's Coil, a very well rolled Venipuncture, which is surprisingly cheap even with an implicit that synergizes well with the way that my character is set up, i.e. using Cast When Damage Taken Molten Shell. And then the rest of the rare items on this character are dumpster tier, or they're just budget rares. There's nothing special in the rest of the character. Gems wise, the only expensive gem that we're using is an Enlightened 3, and you can pick up a corrupted one, someone's unfortunate accident they've had while they've been trying to make an Enlightened 4. You can generally pick that up for well under a Divine Orb as well. So let's talk about the strategy itself. Firstly, let's start with the overall plan. The overall plan is to add a lot of extra rare monsters onto every map that we're running, and then to scale their loot. So let's start with how we're adding the rare monsters. 2 copies of Scarab of Adversaries. It's as simple as that. These will add 8 additional packs between them to the map, and each one of them will be solely comprised of rare monsters. And the mirrored gimmick with them isn't all that important. It just means that you'll get 2 copies of the same rare monster. So rather than getting 6 different rare monsters that all have different stats to each other, you'll get 2 that are of Group A, 2 that are Group B, 2 that are Group C. This can sometimes burn you if you end up with really, really heinous ones, but it doesn't happen all that often. Now, if your character is really strong, you could use something more difficult as a source of additional rare monsters, and Einhar's beast mechanics are something you can consider, but that would be a variant strategy, almost going so far as to be an entirely new strategy at that point. So that's how we're adding more rare monsters to the map. Now, we want to scale up the number of mods on each of those rare monsters. We're going to do this through 2 axes. The first one is always present in this strategy, and that is Horned Scarab of Nemeses, plus 2 modifiers to every rare monster in the area. This both makes them more difficult as in combat opponents, but also causes them to drop more and better loot, and for that loot to be modified more times by some of the mechanics that are involved in rare monster conversions. We'll come back to rare monster conversions in a sec. The key thing you want to recognize here though is that every additional modifier a rare monster has adds to that rare monster's quantity of loot and the rarity of the items that drop. And so Horned Scarab of Nemesis scales it up further. And this is Editing GOG popping in because I forgot something very, very important when I was originally recording this video, and as a result, I better fix that up now. That is that increased rarity that you get is a more multiplier to the amount of gold that you get. Not sure exactly what the formula is, but it seems like it's pretty close to linear. And on top of that, the amount of rarity that you've got also causes some but not all of the rare conversions to get better. So a couple of them explicitly exclude rarity, and some of the best ones exclude rarity that the players got, but a bunch of the other ones don't. And so you'll find that it doesn't just cause you to get more uniques, although more uniques are always welcome, but it also causes you to get more of other special things that you're interested in, more 6-link bombs, more of various other good stuff that you're going to get when you're doing this. The other way that we're playing with this same mechanic though, the hardest version of this strategy is going to use tier 17 maps that have the rolled mod, plus 2 additional rare monster mods on every rare monster in the area, i.e. a second copy of Horned Scarab of Nemeses, and this will also come with an additional percentage increase to the number of rare monsters that are in the area as well. This is everything we want. Unfortunately, this modifier doesn't add much quantity, rarity, and pack size to the map, but it's still really, really strong, and it's so good, in fact, that it's the best single mod that you can get on a tier 17 version of this strategy. Side note, while I'm saying that you're doing this in tier 17s, you don't have to do it in 17s. The strategy works just fine in 16s, but in that case, you won't have access to that mod. Now, I don't recommend rolling that mod yourself. I believe it to be 1 in 57 to roll with Chaos Orbs. It's easier just to trade for maps that already have it, especially because some of the times that you do hit that mod, you'll get something heinous alongside it that you either can't beat or that's going to slow you down monstrously in completing that map. The other thing you'll often find is that sometimes you get a tier 17 where you can do the most of the map, but you can't defeat the map boss, and that's another thing that you'll have to consider how you want to handle. Okay, so that's the Horned Scarab of Nemeses. We mentioned that there are loot conversion mechanics. Let's talk about those. This is the Horned Scarab of Tradition. Horned Scarab of Tradition is one of the 2 very rare scarabs we're going to be using. Although Horned Scarab of Nemeses is something that is a Horned Scarab, it's much more common than all the other Horned Scarabs. Horned Scarab of Tradition, though, is rare. However, at the same time, it's very cheap. All rare and unique monsters in area have their dropped items transformed by a reward modifier. Now, these reward modifiers are an RNG proc that you get when you kill a rare monster. You can stack them, you can get multiple of them at the same time. Some of them are very beneficial, some of them are complete trash, and most of them are in between. So let's start with the trash ones. The trash ones are the one that Vaals every item that drops from the monster, the one that causes every item that drops from the monster to be converted into armor, and the one that converts everything to weapons, and the other one that converts everything from that monster into jewelry. These are trash, they just fill up the loot pool. They're not something you want, but you're going to see a lot of them with Horned Scarab of Tradition. However, there's a few that you do want to see and that are much more significant when they appear. There's the most famous one, is the one that converts all of the monster's drops into currency. This is simply not as good as it used to be in earlier incarnations of the game. It kind of broke the game a bit in 3.23 and it was almost completely removed. It's still around, but it's not important anymore. The ones that are more significant though are the ones that cause items that drop from the monsters to be maximum linked, the ones that cause them to have maximum numbers of sockets, and the ones that cause the items to be vended and for the player to receive an enormous amount of currency, like basically the currency they would have got if they vended the item personally, but multiplied by something substantial. So for instance, if you would have had a 6 socket piece of chest armor that dropped, instead of that, that gets vended for 7 Jeweller Orbs, but instead of the game giving you 7 Jeweller Orbs, it gives you 7 times some large number. You might get 70 Jeweller Orbs instead, you might get 105 Jeweller Orbs. This is going to be one of the more significant sources of wealth that you'll get when you're using a Horned Scarab of Tradition. The other thing that you'll sometimes get is what I term 6-link bombs. This is when you get the maximum sockets conversion and the maximum links conversion on the same monster. You will see that in the background in the footage of this video. I get a massive, massive 6-link bomb in this. I feel like you get an average of 3 6-links a map doing this strategy, but it won't be 3 this map, 2 next map, 4 next map. It'll be 0 this map, 0 next map, 13 the next map, then 0, then 7, then 0, then 8. That's the sort of cadence you'll find them, but it does feel like you get about 3 every map on average. You get a huge amount of Alteration Orbs from the times that your loot gets vended, and so on and so forth. The final Scarab we're using is Scarab of Radiant Storms. This is a Magic Find Scarab and it's the budget one. The less budget one is the Horned Scarab of Glittering. But with Scarab of Radiant Storms, there are 2 things that this does. It causes Tempest to appear. When the Tempest strikes the player gets a 20-second Magic Find buff, and this Magic Find buff is moderate, but it is significant. You want to try and have a lot of uptime on this. It won't be 100% of the time. You will see that some of the monsters I kill in the background footage end up dying while I'm not under the Scarab of Radiant Storms effect, but it's probably up for 80% of the monster kills. This is a pretty useful thing to have, especially because player rarity and player quantity sometimes, not always, seem to affect some of those loot conversions we were talking about before. In any case, Scarab of Radiant Storms, when it applies to the player, is a significant effect overall. It's a moderate increase to rarity, moderate increase to quantity, but those 2 things work together. And I found the strategy really came together when I added this Scarab. Previously, I'd been using one of the Scarabs that adds an extra shrine instead, and I think the Radiant Storms ended up being better. But I did mention Radiant Storms does 2 things. The Resplendent Tempest can affect the player by giving them the buff, but it can also affect the monsters. When it strikes a monster instead of the player, it causes that monster to get a loot buff. That buff is very short-lived, and it's something that if you can kill them really quickly, it'll give you a noticeable boost in the amount of wealth that you get from them, but most of the time, this is just a little bonus. I don't try to optimize for this. I do try and optimize for the aspect where it's on the player, but anytime that it's on the monsters, that's a little bonus as far as I'm concerned. Anyways, because we're killing so many rare monsters with no magic find on my character, I am still getting a good 100,000 to 130,000 gold most maps. Although the map that you're going to see here, I actually get a little bit starved for gold, and I only end up walking out with 92,000. Editing GOG here to throw in a few other little factors that affect this. If you're running this on a tier 16 map without map modifier effect scaling and the map is 8 modifiers, you can expect about 22 to 24,000 gold most maps. If you're running this on a tier 16 8 mod map and you have map modifier effect, you're looking more like 35,000. If you're running this on a tier 17 but you don't get the 2 extra rare monster mods, then you're looking like something like 60 to 75,000 typically. And if you're running it the way that I'm doing it here, you can expect more like 120. Additionally, sometimes you're going to get lucky, sometimes you're going to get bismuth. When you get bismuth, you're just going to get a lot more because that's an extra modifier, not just on every rare monster, but also on every magic monster as well. So the rare times that bismuth shows up, or for that matter, the rare times that the wildwood shows up, if you are confident to deal with the wildwood, which can be quite difficult, or the rare times that you get a sentinel show up, all of these are things that can scale things up further, but are also going to make things a bit harder as well. It's up to you whether you think you can take these things on, but if you are up to the challenge, then you'll get higher amounts of gold again. If you run this just on a 4 mod rare tier 16 map, you can still expect to get about 14,000 gold a map, maybe 15,000, which is alright, but maybe it's not worth the Scarabs in that case. Okay, so let's talk about the Atlas here. I don't think that this is necessarily all that optimized, but it does have all of the basics. The key basics, the important things. We're taking map modifier effect, because map modifier effect, whilst it makes things more dangerous, and I actually find that if I take the extra 3 nodes that are there and a couple of the other smalls, it ends up being a little bit too sketchy. Whilst these are dangerous, they have a massive scaling effect on the amount of loot that drops. Additionally, we are going to take the mounting modifiers and the chiseled perfection clusters, which add more of this effect. So these end up being really, really sketchy, but they also end up providing a lot of extra loot. Finally, we want to take one of the influence types. Now, I have gone with the Searing Exarch here, but the Eater of Worlds is actually stronger if your character can deal with Eater of Worlds altars. I just find the Searing Exarch altars much easier to deal with. The reason this matters is that when you kill Exarch monsters, there's a small chance of getting an Exarch altar. When those Exarch altars spawn, if they've got something that affects the player, then there'll often be a zone-wide rarity and quantity increase on that. And these stack with everything that's on the map, they stack with everything that you've got up from Chisel Perfection and the like, and they just end up with you getting more loot and more rarity. The thing that's important is that quantity and rarity kind of multiply with each other, and they also multiply with each other when it comes to awarding you gold. That's why this strategy ends up giving so much more gold, and I found that my gold income per map went up from 60,000 to 120,000 when I made the changes of adding in the Searing Exarch content, and also added in the map modifier multipliers. I also started dying a lot more, but that's just the way that softcore life is. You end up dying a lot. In terms of the rest of the Atlas that we've got here, I honestly don't really recommend necessarily copying this as it is. You can, it works, but I think you could probably go more optimal again. I've taken all the Shrines content. Shrines I find are really good at the moment. They add more monsters and they also give you a player power boost. And for a period, I was also using the Shrine Scarabs as well. Like I said, I found something else ended up being better. I have all of the good Scarab generation nodes, including a bunch of these types of things like explorative carapaces, which makes the Scarabs that drop for you better without actually giving you more of them. And I also have some of the hidden Scarab modifying nodes as well. That is Dimensional Barrier, Love by the Sun, Trade Embargo, Sealed Domain, Secular Focus, Fungal Remission, Servant of Order, and Ominous Silence. What these do is they ban certain Scarabs from dropping, which then increases the number of the other ones that you get. And of these mechanics, it's only really the Harvest ones that are worth anything. So for that reason, we want Harvest Scarabs dropping. We want most of the things that aren't from these blockable mechanics to drop the Scarabs, but the ones that are from these blockable mechanics, we'd rather they just get re-rolled. And that's why we take so many of these content blocks. Anyways, that's the core things that make this Atlas work, and then you can put in whatever else you want. I've still just got it set up for Maven Witness so that I can jump over to Maven Witness in lower tier maps when I'm not feeling like running with Scarabs, but that's definitely not optimal. You can pick a different mechanic, and in fact I would advise you to pick a different mechanic there. You'll find something that's to your taste. Anyways, in the background I have the rest of the footage of that map. I'm going to leave it there. May your Horned Scarabs of Tradition have interesting results. And here's what it looks like when we turn off the loot filter for a little while and just go for a little bit of a wander through this map and look at all of the glorious rubbish that's dropped on the ground. Most of this is stuff you wouldn't be interested in picking up at this level of play, but could actually be good loot earlier on in progression.